gotta admit, I don't know what I'm doing. Don't know how to edit. Don't know where to look. When I decided to challenge myself more, I took it too far. So what are we doing here? I would like to welcome you to my new channel, Finer Things with Jess. For those of you that know me, you're probably completely confused as to why we're here. I am not someone who makes reels, sits in front of my phone, putting content out of myself. I'm not someone who is typically doing any of these things. And then if you really know me, you know that I do not know how to use technology. So that's exciting. And yet somehow we ended up here because I decided to challenge myself. Apparently I'm nearing a midlife crisis because I'm 36 and I think I need to do something more than I'm doing. Anyway, why are we here, you ask? Great question. Thank you for asking. Let's start from the beginning. When I was growing up, I used to read fiction books all the time. I really enjoyed reading. I read all the time. And then I became an adult, and I don't know if it was moving away to go to college or what the case is, but I stopped reading. And then somewhere I got in my head and decided that if I was going to read, it had to be nonfiction only. I had to learn these things that were super important to, be smarter. It was a stupid idea, and what I have been left with is a shelf full of half-read nonfiction books. I have learned about myself that I would rather listen to content to grow my knowledge than read it. The only thing that I enjoy reading is fiction. Recently, I realized that I was spending way too much time on my phone and I wasn't doing things that really challenged me. And reading, like we know, reading can challenge you as a person. So I decided to start reading. And this is where the hypocrisy of me comes in, because then I would read these books and I would go to YouTube looking for reviews, looking for people talking about it. And I wasn't finding content that resonated with me. I wasn't finding people that saw the books the way I saw them. I wasn't finding people that were talking about the things that I noticed in the books, and I wasn't finding my place. I know that I said that I wanted to be on my phone less, and yet I'm on YouTube looking for people to watch, to have discussions or thought-provoking moments about these books that I read, and now I'm on my phone talking to myself so that we can have discussions about the books I read. And I get that this is a cycle of crazy and this is where we're at, and I'm fine with myself as a person and fine with the fact that none of this makes sense. So one of the other things that I noticed that kind of led me to start this channel is that nobody was sharing my thoughts and opinions, personal. I wasn't agreeing with anybody. And if I've learned anything from the internet, or at least the comment section in the internet, is that if your opinion is not out there, the world is gonna cease to exist. So, I'm doing you all a service by being incredibly uncomfortable and attempting this. So the three of you that are watching, let's do this. Let's change the world with my opinion. So I spent a month having this thought of I should do this. I should see where this goes, because I really want to have discussions about the things that I have seen in these, or read or thought in these books. And I know what you're thinking. I could have just went to a book club, but no. There are people there. I would have to wear a bra to go. There's a whole lot of no, okay? And so I'm getting up the courage to discuss this idea with my husband, and I finally sit him down and I pitch him this whole idea that I have where we come together, there'll be discussion in the comments, and we'll just actually review a book instead of me just talking about the plot for, 30 minutes. And as soon as I was done, he was extremely supportive, and he looked at me and he said, "You have to name this the Finer Things Club." I knew there was a reason I married him.
I'm sorry, Andy, but this is a closed club.
Why can't I be in the club?
So, if you don't want to be Andy Dwyer, sitting at the table next to us, not invited to this exclusive club where we're going to be discussing the finer things in life, then I would invite you to like and subscribe to this page. And then whenever I, succeed at making this and then try another one, you will get notified and you can be here and you can watch me be outrageous. So we are going to get into it. So when I first decided to start reading again, I had no idea where to start, and so I went to Google, like most people probably would. And I don't remember what I Googled, but it led me to this book, which is Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell, and I reserved it, and we went and picked it up, and I made it through it pretty quickly. What I want to do with this channel, so that everyone kind of feels welcome, is that I want to start by giving a non-spoiler recommendation of the book, so that if you're kind of coming to decide, well, materials. It's something I'd want to read. What are some of the notes that I should know before I spend my time on it? That will be spoiler free, and then you can break off if you don't want spoilers, and then we'll discuss the book. And so Lisa Jewell is a UK author. All of her books that I've read so far are based in London or London area. And it's actually somewhat of a challenge for me because I have never left the country. And she says words I don't know. And so I have to Google. And you know what? I'm learning things. Then She Was Gone is her most popular book that she has written. I actually went through the audiobook because it had been a few months since I had read it and I didn't want to forget parts of the plot. And that is narrated by Helen Duff. I don't listen to audiobooks that aren't nonfiction, but I thought she did really good. The genre is typically mystery thriller. I think that that's just like they're married together because when you read her books, they're not thrillers. On Goodreads, it has 4.1 out of 5 stars, which I think is a pretty good rating. I would probably rate it around 4 stars myself, mostly because I feel like there was a few things that weren't really circled for me. And I don't even think I noticed them the first time, but it was when I went back and did it again, I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't quite make sense to me. And a part of me wonders if she was like pointing to the failures of the police and social worker system, but she didn't really say it. But like to avoid feeling frustrated that things weren't circled back well, kind of feel like I'm left with that, and that doesn't make me feel good. I have friends in law enforcement. I don't want to read a book that is indicating they didn't do their jobs, but I guess also if you follow true crime, there's just some cases that were fumbled all the way. It's not necessarily untrue, and she didn't really say it. I feel like I was just left to like put those pieces together myself to figure out that this is why some things didn't really make sense. I thought this was interesting. So I Googled, why did she write this book? And she explained that she was drawn to the theme of missing children, quote, because the moment you become a parent, you start building up a roster of worst nightmare scenarios, and your imagination runs wild thinking of awful things that might have happened to your children while they're away from you. The thought of someone hurting your child, of your child being somewhere where they are scared or in pain and helpless, and you're not there to hold them in your arms, is just unbearable. There's something reassuring about your worst nightmare being all wrapped up in a neat, fictionalized package and not happening in real life. Look, ma'am, respectfully, you seem super nice, but I don't like being misled. There is nothing neat. There's nothing comforting in this book. There's nothing where I'm like, well, it wasn't my kids, I guess it's fine. I feel like you lied to me, and I don't appreciate it. This book made me bawl my eyes out. I feel like people say that, and then the mental imagery someone gets is like, oh, she had a few tears. No, I cried for hours, and not just a few tears. I was bawling my eyes out at this book. And part of that is because I refused to believe what was happening, and then in the end I had to accept it. My 9-year-old came in while I was losing my mind crying, and for the first time in her very short life, she realized that books can hurt your feelings, and she did not like that revelation. And you know, I guess at some point she's gonna have to read Bridge to Terabithia or The Giver or whatever, but like in that moment, she was like, I'm never reading one of these books, and I'm not gonna break the news to her that eventually she's gonna have to like move on in school. This was her eye-opening moment. Not all content in the world is happy and funny, and sometimes it's terrible and it makes you cry your eyes out. It was not good, okay? This is one thing that I noticed when I was trying to hear what other people's thoughts. Nobody was saying that it was gutting to them. And maybe it was harder for me because I'm a mother of 2 daughters and I just could put myself in the position a little bit more, but I also just felt her writing was so good at making you feel it. The writing style of this book and most of her books are third person. Sometimes you have a first person perspective and you're usually jumping around the plot. You jump all around and then eventually she weaves it all together, and that's when the mystery is found. And this book is no exception. I think one of the reasons why this book is her number 1 is because she spends the majority of the first person from the villain's perspective. And I feel there's just something extra there where you're getting to hear why they did what they did. You're just getting into their psyche a little bit more than you normally would. I will say this book is very good. My recommendation, let's get there. Should you read this book? If you like your books neatly wrapped up and packaged, then this book really isn't for you. I would recommend instead from her The Night She Disappeared or the Family Upstairs series. I feel like those are wrapped up nicer. But if you like true crime, if you don't mind having an emotional reaction out of a book, definitely I would recommend you read this book. I will say that this is the first book of hers that I read, and I finished it and I was like, I'm not ever reading this woman again because she has has betrayed me and hurt my feelings. Why do I want to do that? And I just got brave enough and I went back and I ended up reading more of her books, and I actually really enjoy her. I don't think this is my favorite of the books she's written, but I can see why people really enjoy it and why it's one of her most popular books. All that being said, if you're not bothered by any of that, yeah, read this book and I think that you'll enjoy it. There's definitely trigger warnings in this book. If you don't want to know what they are, sign off now. I'm going to read what the internet says. Profanity, sexual situations, and then Google said, although not graphic, and I would agree, they're like PG-13 suggestive. They're not graphic. There is kidnapping, drinking alcohol, violence, death, murder, and miscarriages. I feel like Google misses that there is also sexual assault. I don't know how it missed it, but there's sexual assault and even forced pregnancy. Sorry, I'm giving away some of the plot. If you can't handle any of those things, which is perfectly valid, don't read this book. So the book starts and it is following Laurel, who is the mother of the Mack family, and she is going into her daughter Hannah's flat to clean it. She gets paid to clean her flat. It's something she does like 1 or 2 times a week, and she takes all the money she gets and puts it in a special bank account, and then one day when she has grandkids, this money's for her grandkids. So she gets into this flat and it's really describing how the flat's kind of dingy and uninspired, and you're finding that Hannah is a big workaholic. She's never home. She works 12 to 14 hour days and her life is just kind of empty because this is all she does. Laurel's cleaning her house and then she realizes that Hannah hasn't been home, wasn't home the night before, and they point out that this is far more alarming to Laurel than it would be to a normal person because she's lost a child. I found it really interesting that she tries calling Hannah's cell phone. Hannah doesn't answer, and then she calls Hannah's office and the receptionist transfers her to Hannah's phone. Hannah answers. Laurel realizes she's alive and then she just hangs up the phone. And I feel like this is really indicating that their relationship is strained. Why wouldn't you just be like, oh, hey, I'm cleaning your house. I noticed that you weren't home. I got worried. I just wanted to hear your voice. You just hang up? That's so weird. This is present time, 2015. And then you jump back to 2005 and it's saying, well, what was Laurel's life before this moment? You find that Laurel wasn't a happy person. She was a very glass half empty woman. Everything her family did drove her crazy. She even says that her husband's breathing annoyed her.
I'm sorry, can you stop breathing so loud, honey? He's like, breathe quietly.
She sounds delightful. You end up finding out that the only person in her house who didn't really bother her is her daughter, Ellie. So she has a husband, Paul, who's super sweet and a big peacemaker, and he seems like a really great guy that she just is annoyed by and she takes for granted. She has an older son named Jake, who's really a background character in the whole book. You don't really hear much about him. You don't really know much about him. But at one point, Ellie, her youngest daughter, is kind of reminiscing on him, and he sounds like he's just kind of like a free spirit. And she's got Hannah, who she describes as the island unto herself. She doesn't get along with anyone in the family. She's difficult. She's the challenging one. And then she has Ellie, who she describes as her golden girl, her lastborn, her baby, her soulmate, her pride, and her joy. And this book is about that child. And she leaves to go to the library one day and she doesn't come back. You know, they were like a middle-class family doing normal things. Then their daughter disappears. Really, this book is third-person perspective following Laura. We never get her first-person perspective. Who was she? How did they handle the loss of her? And who was she 10 years later, which was a woman completely lost in grief. One day, Ellie goes to the library. She's supposed to be home for dinner, doesn't return. The police are called, and the investigation starts. And this is really where I'm like, the more they describe the investigation, there's so many things that just don't make sense to me, or it wasn't addressed on, or maybe we were supposed to assume and I just didn't. So right away, 10 years later, the family's disconnected, and 10 years before, Laurel's an unhappy woman and her daughter's missing. The next chapter, you're still in 2005, and it's talking about how Ellie is dating this boy named Theo. They're both constantly throughout the book called the golden couple. They're just popular kids that everybody wants to be around. The ones that are just nice to everybody. Everybody likes them. Theo's super smart and does really well in school, and Ellie ends up getting a B+ in math, and this just upsets her world because she's 15, and apparently Theo won't approve of her not getting an A. I don't know. So she asks for a math tutor, and it's noted that the family can't really afford it, but agree to it anyway. I don't know. So the book talks about the family, talks about Ellie wanting a tutor, and then goes back to talking about the police investigation. And it says, the last sighting of Ellie had been caught on CCTV on Stroud Green Road at 10:43, showing her stopping briefly to check her reflection in a car window. For a while, there'd been a theory that she had stopped to look at someone in a car or say something to the driver, but they traced the car's owner and proved that he had been on holiday at the time of Ellie's disappearance, and the car had been parked there for the duration. And that was that. Her recorded journey had ended there. They'd done a house-to-house search of the immediate vicinity, brought in known pedophiles for questioning, taken CCTV footage from each and every shopkeeper over on Stroud Green Road, wheeled out Laurel and Paul to be filmed for television appeal that had been seen by roughly 8 million people, but nothing had ever taken them further than the last sighting of Ellie looking at her reflection at 10:43. And it just kind of goes into talking about how the family tried to move forward. The police just basically decided that she was a huge high achiever, and because of this, they had their GCSEs coming up, which I had to Google this, and apparently this is equivalent to the high school diploma. It's a big deal. It's a big exam. This is why she needed the tutor, plus to impress the boyfriend, and it's decided she just ran away. We're not worried about her being kidnapped. We've just decided that this girl just ran away. And it doesn't matter that her mom is like, my kid wouldn't run away. This is the theory we've gone with and we stick with for years, which, okay. But here we are, 10 years later, nothing's happened for years. Year 3 into Ellie disappearing, Laurel and Paul get a divorce, and then year 7 into Ellie being disappeared, Laurel sells their house and she moves, and she's living this very disconnected life. The family's disconnected, she's disconnected. She is a person that is very structured. She sees people on the same time every day. She's scheduled, everything she does is meticulous, and it has to make sense to her. And the family's a mess. And everybody's a mess. Hannah's a workaholic. Jake is off living far away with some girl named Blue. Paul has moved on and moved in with a woman named Bonnie, but there's no family. There's no connection. Laurel's never met Bonnie, which I guess doesn't really matter because their kids are adults. But 10 years later, after years of silence, a detective called and said that they found things in the woods and they wanted her to come and identify them. And then we switch back to then, and it's all about how Noelle Donnelly is the tutor that Laurel found through a family friend. And she's like super weird. She's very socially awkward. She makes Ellie super uncomfortable, but she's also this really great teacher. So Ellie keeps her. And that's like her kind of introduction. And then you go back to Laurel driving to the police station to figure things out because new information has come and we're going in between now and then. The tutoring sessions that are super weird and them finding out that they found Ellie's book bag that she left with and a few other things. And then here's where they like say, oh, by the way, also that break-in that you had years ago that was someone used a key to get into your house. Here's some of the stuff too. And this was also weird because this thing happened and the police furthered their thought that she just ran away because she came home to get things that she could pawn and steal cash and whatever else. And at the end of this, they end up coming in when she identifies all the stuff. A detective comes in and says, we found bones. When they flash back after a couple chapters to like the tutoring sessions, and Noelle comes in one day and she's like super aggressive and makes Ellie really uncomfortable. And so Ellie asks her mom to let her go. And at that point she has an A and she just tells her mom, well, I don't really need her anymore. Let's save money. And she doesn't admit to her mom, this woman is weird and she makes me really uncomfortable. She was giving very grooming vibes. She was bringing her stuff. She was being very inappropriate. She was crossing lots of lines. And for some reason, Ellie didn't tell her that, which if someone is making you uncomfortable, you need to tell someone, okay? Let's learn from this lesson. And if someone gives you weird vibes, just be like, hey, this person made me feel uncomfortable. But she doesn't do that. Noelle goes out of her mind. She's living her life. She's with Theo. She's planning her summer. She's having a good time. She's ready for her exams. And then we end up reaching the point where it says, Paul and Laurel buried the partial remains of their daughter on a sunny afternoon at the tail end of an indolent Indian summer. They buried her femurs, her tibias, and most of her skull. According to the forensic report, her daughter had been run over by a vehicle. Her broken body then dragged some distance through the woodland, buried in a shallow grave, left for animals to take her bones and scatter them through the woods. And it kind of goes on about how they opened up another 12-week investigation. And this is one of the plot holes, okay? I didn't read it, but they didn't know if she got hit before or after she died. This is 2015. You're telling me no one can look at these bones and tell me if she's dead before she got hit? It's weird, okay? But this is the part that really ruined it for me, I think. They're admitting she's dead. And it's supposed to be cut and dry. She's dead. You know she's dead. But they said, oh, we found a body. And then they end up burying her. And there's never a point where DNA evidence showed this was her. And so in my mind, oh, okay, well, eventually we're going to find her alive somewhere. No, at the very end of the book, I had to finally accept that she was dead. And this is probably why I cried my eyes out. Because if I had just accepted it by page 50, we wouldn't have been there. So they bury her, and a month later, they flash forward to Laurel. And this is where I feel she starts to move forward with her life. She starts to realize, I don't have to go to sleep every night wondering what happened to my daughter. She's buried, and there's so many pieces I don't know, but she just accepts the police theory at this point that she must have just run away. And so she ends up going to her old neighborhood, getting her hair done, and she goes to a cafe, and this guy walks in, and he sits next to her, and he compliments her and strikes up a a conversation with her and he offers him some of his carrot cake and they just have a meet cute. And she decides that for the first time, she's not annoyed by someone. There's nothing he's doing that's wrong. So apparently he's not annoying her with his breathing. One thing to note is she noticed this guy really catches her eye because he dresses like her husband, but your husband breathed wrong.
Breathe quietly.
Whatever. So good for her. She's moving forward and she recognizes in this conversation that she's taking steps towards moving forward with her life. And I think that's great. And I feel like this is one really strong part of the book is that it details her loneliness and her sadness and her disconnected being as a human. She's just disconnected from her kids. She's disconnected from everything. So that's one strong theme throughout the book. So she meets this guy, he gives her his number, and she ends up immediately going to visit Hannah unannounced, and Hannah's not having it because they do not have a good relationship. But I thought it was really interesting that she meets this guy, she feels more alive, and she immediately tries to connect with her daughter. This is the part of the book where we stop going back and forth, back and forth. This really just sticks in the now, and it's the third person perspective of Laurel and Floyd's relationship kind of starting, and Laurel waking up, and they go on a couple of dates. During this time too, Laurel ends up realizing that Hannah keeps not coming home and finds evidence of flowers, and then finds a card in the garbage can when she's going to take it out, and it's some sort of note about how I can't wait to see you, I love you, and then it's signed T. Guys, this is Theo. Ellie's Theo. And I knew that right away. Somehow I can't accept the fact that the girl's dead, but I can accept the fact she's dating Theo. And I put a lot of thought into this because I've wondered if it's weird. And I feel like if Ellie were alive, yeah, that'd be weird. They had a pretty hot and heavy romance, but they both have this shared experience. They both have lost this person that they really cared about. It's not that weird. Laurel's reaction when she finds out later really irritates me, but we'll get there. So they're going on these dates. She's finding out that Hannah has a boyfriend. She keeps trying to convince Hannah to tell her about this boy, and Hannah keeps refusing to tell her. And kind of throughout it too, Laurel's mom is a side character. She's had 3 strokes. She's in a home. She's the one that really encourages Laurel to pursue Floyd. What really irritates me though is that she goes on a second date with Floyd and ends up at his house. And his oldest daughter's there. And in their first or second date, they're going over, oh yeah, we have kids. And Laurel's leaving out the fact that she has a daughter that is dead and instead is acting like she just has 2 kids. And he's like, yeah, I have this daughter named Sarah Jade from my first marriage. And she asks about her and he can't answer. He's like, well, she's just weird. You'll have to meet her. You can't come up with one nice thing to say about your kid. He has a younger daughter who's 9. So Sarah's 21, Poppy's 9. And the second he's asked about Poppy, he's all smiles and rainbows and has all these great things to say about her. And so that night they get to the house. Sarah Jade is babysitting and they show that she's kind of weird. She's a nude model. She's kind of aloof. She's dating a married man. Like, she's kind of a mess, okay? And Laurel spends the night, and the next morning Poppy wakes her up in the bed, which is super weird and inappropriate, but whatever. Immediately Laurel realizes that Poppy looks just like her daughter Ellie. There's differences, but she's struck by how much they look alike. This whole first couple sections of the book is really just that. Laurel getting into this relationship. She's really excited about it. They're clicking really well. She keeps wondering why this man would ever be interested in her. And she's working on restoring her relationships with Hannah, especially. And then she's also getting closer with Floyd and Poppy. And at one point she's recognizing there's these whole stages missed with Poppy where she's not interacting with any kids her age. And she doesn't have a mother. It's said that he was married to Sarah Jade's mom. Poppy's mom is missing. This is the other thing that they're bonding about. Oh, we both had these people that disappeared. And in the midst of it, Laurel's trying to come back to life. She's trying to reconnect her family. She's trying to be brave. And she suggests that they go out as a family. And it will be the first time she's met her ex-husband's partner. They haven't done anything as a family in 10 years. And Hannah's kind of resistant, but they end up doing it. And she ends up bringing Floyd. And they've been on like 4 dates. Like, this whole romance between them lasts a month. Whatever. In this meeting, they have a really great time and it actually is a really good thing. And when they're leaving, Paul's like, dang, she reminds me of Ellie. That's really weird, which is the big part of the book. And then at one point, she's there at the house. She stayed the night. She decides to leave. And on the counter is a piece of mail that says, Noelle Donnelly, return to sender. She doesn't live here or whatever. And Laurel's like, this is really weird. I know that name. And she starts thinking about it more and more. And then she realizes that it was Ellie's tutor. And a lot of people might think that's weird, but Lisa does such a good job of making Noelle a forgettable person. That's what she was to them. She was this forgettable person to them. She just was a background person. She was kind of off. So it made sense to me that she kind of forgot about her, but you end up realizing that Noelle's the one that kidnapped Ellie. They've kind of indicated at this point, but they haven't really got to the point where they confirm it. This is the first sign, I think, to Laurel though. Something's weird. I know this person. It's so weird that we're connected. She ends up reading Ellie's diaries, which she's read before, and there's a whole entry about how Noelle creeped her out. She didn't trust her. She ended tutoring because of it. And that's where I'm like, Wouldn't the police have asked to read this to figure out, did she write about wanting to run away? Was there someone weird in her life? And then also how Noelle got her is it was Ellie went to the library and Noelle saw her, and it was upsetting to Noelle because Ellie didn't recognize her because, like I said, she's like out of sight, out of mind kind of a person. And she lures her to her house because she's like, oh, I know that we stopped studying together, but I have this study guide that's been really helpful and I'm just 4 doors down. Do you want to come to my house and get it? Her soul was telling her not to do it and she did it. So again, listen to your gut, guys. But it says that they went door to door and knocked on all the surrounding houses, and it never addresses whether or not they knocked on her door. So it's just weird to me because, okay, it's written in her diary, and then also Laurel brings up Poppy's mother is Ellie's old tutor, and Hannah's like, oh yeah, by the way, she hated that woman and thought she was super weird and she creeped her out. Why wouldn't Hannah say something? Wouldn't the police question Hannah? Is it just bad police work? Because I feel you would read her diary and you'd ask her siblings, was there anyone stalking her and making her feel uncomfortable? This is why it doesn't get 5 stars, okay? So anyway, all these things are happening. She's starting to notice weird things. The family's connecting more. She's trying to repair her relationship with Hannah. But then also at some point she's out shopping and she sees Theo and she's like, oh, I saw him at the funeral. He was there. We talked, whatever. And then she notices this girl comes out of the shop and she's smiling and happy. And then she realizes it's Hannah. And this is her first moment that she realizes, oh, Hannah can be happy. Maybe she just doesn't like me. Then she gets mad because how dare Hannah date Theo? Theo belongs to Ellie, and what is she, just some consolation prize? And I haven't mentioned it yet, but one of the things that I really appreciated about this book was I don't like Laurel, but I also feel for her. The empathy was really good, but then I also felt really conflicted because I have 2 daughters and my oldest is so much like me and we butt heads like crazy and she drives me nuts. She was 2 days old and she came out and the only person she wanted was my husband. That doesn't happen. I get it now. He's my place of calm and she's like me, and so he's her place of calm. At the end of the day, I love my daughter and I'm not annoyed by her. Everyone always says how marriage is the most challenging thing you can ever do, and I disagree. My oldest daughter is the most challenging thing to date that I've ever had to do. She makes me a better person. Laurel just resents Hannah for it. You're not good enough is kind of the vibe she gives off all the time, and it really irks me because then I also noticed that my younger daughter is a lot like Ellie. She's friendly with everybody. They talk about how Ellie's, everyone rotates around her. She's just so friendly and inclusive and loves everybody, and yay for Ellie. My younger daughter is happy and easy and welcoming to everybody. So I was really torn as I was reading this because there's a way to have a difficult child and not fault them for it. I don't know. Her attitude towards Hannah sucked. In the end, she gets it and apologizes to Hannah, and she realizes, oh, I've been a really bad mom. There's even a point where subconsciously she's like, you should have been the one that disappeared, not Ellie. Do better, which I guess she tries to. She makes amends. By the end, they're good. But anyway, she bumps into them on the street or sees them, but they don't see her, and she's filled with rage. And there's a bunch of the book where she's just super upset that how dare Hannah be with Theo because Theo belongs to Ellie. Ellie's dead. I don't like it, but this is where we're at, okay? So then part 3 of the book is Noelle's first person perspective. Noelle's explaining herself. And I think this is why the book does so well, is because you're reading it and you're like, you are lying to yourself. Get help. There's one point where she tries to say that she never meant to kidnap Ellie. She describes how infatuated she got with her and how I just need to be close to her. And she's explaining her relationship with Floyd. She grew up in a huge home. She didn't think her parents were really nice. One of her sisters died of cancer when she was young, and she was the only girl that was left. And here's where she kind of mirrored Hannah's story. Her parents always wished that she was the one that died and the other sister that stayed alive. She ends up going to university. She's incredibly smart, but she's a failure to launch. She gets a job at some posh magazine and realizes that's not the place for her, and then she thinks about teaching, but then she realizes that she can't do that because she can't be in a room full of kids. She ends up tutoring and she's broke, okay? She's this super smart woman and she's broke. And then you also find out that at 41 years old, she's still a virgin.
No, Kelly Clarkson!
Which, no judgment, okay? I think that's really to describe how disconnected she is. She has no friends. She can't find a way to have a romantic relationship. And she ends up reading one of Floyd's books because she's super into math. And she gets infatuated with Floyd and starts stalking him. They meet at some book signing and he reveals to her like, oh, we live near each other. And then she freaking stalks him until they end up together and admits that their relationship is basically just sexual and he has no real interest in her, and she hates his daughter Sarah Jade. Their whole relationship is toxic. toxic, okay? It's a mess. She's a mess. The relationship's a mess. None of this is surprising. She ends up having a miscarriage. By the time she has the miscarriage, it's kind of known the relationship's ending, and you can tell that Floyd kind of wants to get out of it, but then he stays in it because he's an idiot, and she gets pregnant again. And this time she doesn't actually tell him she's pregnant because she felt when she lost the first baby, it caused all this tension. And the day she miscarries the second child is the day that she meets Ellie and starts tutoring her. This is where she's like, this girl is the greatest thing I've ever met. I don't know what's so special about her, but she's super great. Everybody loves her. She ends up looking forward to her weekly sessions with her. They're the highlight of her week, which, girl, make better choices, okay? Work on yourself, go to counseling. I don't know. Find a way to enjoy your life that is outside of a 15-year-old girl, okay? But she gets obsessed, is giving her gifts. It's super weird. They're telling it more from her perspective. And then the sessions end, and 2 weeks later, she decides that everything was better in her life when Ellie was in her life. This is where I'm saying she lies to herself, because she is writing this first-person perspective as her talking to or writing to Floyd. And she's saying, well, I didn't really intend on kidnapping her that day. She just so happened to not recognize me, and it was earth-shattering, and then I just, whatever, it just happened. Really, later on, you find out that she went to the doctor for insomnia and got sleep pills, and then she figured out how to sedate someone with them. She invites her over. Ellie doesn't want to be there. She gets drugged, and then she wakes up 12 hours later in Noelle's disgusting basement. And the basement's already been revealed to the reader because Laurel's putting stuff together, right? Why is Noelle connected? And somewhere in her gut, she knows that there's a connection between Floyd and Ellie. Somehow this is connected. She's not really admitting it to herself. And I feel this is confirmed because Jake's girlfriend Blue called her after their birthday dinner and was like, there's something off with this guy. I don't know. I don't trust him. It's really weird. And she said he wasn't capable of love and he had a dark aura. So this is leading Laurel to investigate, and she ends up creeper stalking Noelle's family and finds out that Noelle's nephews are living in Noelle's house. And she goes into the house and she walks down to the basement, and it's a bed and a toilet, and it's super creepy. There she finds a chapstick, and she goes home and realizes that it matches Ellie's set. There are all these pieces coming together. Now we're in the book and Ellie's down in the basement, and the next several chapters are just detailing her being there. And it's awful. And Noelle keeps saying to her, oh, well, one day this will be over and you'll get to take your GCSEs and you'll be back in your life. And Ellie's trying to cling to that. And a couple months go by, and Noelle comes downstairs one day and she's all dressed nice for her, which I don't think is that nice. But Ellie notices that her makeup's smeared and she's kind of disheveled. She stays and talks to Ellie for a while. And then when Ellie wakes up the next morning, she realizes something happened. She doesn't know what it is. And you end up finding out that Noelle impregnated her. She says she got sperm from a PhD student online that reminded her of Theo, and she was going to make a baby because kids solve everyone's problems, right? Nobody ever gets divorced because of kids or anything. This woman. So a few months goes by. Ellie, of course, doesn't know she's pregnant. It's not like Noelle told her. There's a little bit of difference in the fact that Noelle's bringing her more nutritious food and stuff, but she didn't know. She was violated, didn't know. And one day she feels the baby, and they're eventually kind of forced to have a conversation, and Noelle's like, oh, well, I'm in my 40s and I couldn't have a baby, and I asked God for a baby, and he told me, there's you'll give me a baby. And why you gotta put this on God? Why do you gotta put your insanity, your violation on God? No, you did something gross and it's on you. It is on you. So Ellie, I am proud of that girl, because Noelle goes on this rant about how, oh, this is God's will, and Ellie's like, yeah, you don't believe in God. And then Noelle got violent. So that wasn't great. She's 8 months pregnant, and Noelle comes home one day and she's in a terrible mood. It is not a good day. They have this really awkward conversation where Noelle's just being mean and angry, and then Noelle doesn't give a crap about the pregnancy anymore. She's not giving her nutritious food. She's not bringing baby gifts, touching her belly, talking about the baby. She's just lost all interest in Ellie and lost all interest in the baby. You end up finding out at whatever point that, oh, Floyd broke up with her a couple weeks before the baby was born, and he just was like, look, we're not a good match. We need to try and figure out how to just co-parent and get along. Throughout the story, in Noelle's mind, well, no, this baby's gonna fix everything because Ellie's perfect or whatever. 2 weeks after Floyd breaks up with Noelle, Ellie gives birth. This is where things really start to go downhill. After the baby, she's getting infections. Things aren't going well. She just gets super depressed. Noelle says that she cries for her mom all the time. In Noelle's perspective, she's saying when the baby's 5 months old, Ellie doesn't want anything to do with her anymore. So the girl, meanwhile, I thought I'd done my best by her. I really did. But she didn't seem well. It was one thing after another, really. First, an infection down below. That seemed to heal of its own own accord. But then she got an infection in one of her breasts, or at least that was my theory. I read up about it on the internet. I told her she must feed the baby from the one breast, feed and feed and feed. She was very hot, then very cold. I gave her over-the-counter remedies, but they didn't work. She lost interest in the baby, and I had to take over feeding her. Then she stopped eating. She called for her mother all the time. Incessant it was. All hours of the day and night. I couldn't bear it for another moment. Then one day, when the baby was about 5 months old, I shut the door to that room, and for a very long time, I did not go back. Why you gotta treat this woman like a piece of garbage? I've not gotten over it. It gets worse. She said that she ended up scheduling an appointment for the baby when she was 2 weeks old, and she went in and was like, I lost my virginity recently and then got pregnant, and the baby came so fast, and I just stayed home with my partner and I had her, and then I was too scared to go out into the world, and so here I am. They scold her and whatever, and they make her a follow-up appointment, and she never goes to it. She got the paperwork she needed to register the baby, and then she says that a midwife had to come for interviews, and she came several times. She called about 100 times, and Noelle just dodged her calls. She said, I did the bare minimum to keep them off the scent. But in social worker parlance, we slipped through the net. Worrying, really, when you think about it. Is this how you're alluding to the fact that everybody just kind of failed? From this point, we kind of go back to the present day. Laura's still trying to figure stuff out. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on that's important but not wildly notable. But when Poppy was 2 or 3, Noelle was like, oh, I should sell my house because the market was booming and she didn't really need all the space. And they're also describing at this time how much Noelle hates being a mother, which big shock, she hates kids. And also like her end goal was Floyd, and they're still broken up because he thinks that she's crazy. So she decides to put the house on the market. Then she remembers, oh, I have a dead body in my house. Oops. And I guess at some point the neighbors came over and complained about the smell, and so she moved Ellie's body up into a blanket box in the attic, and however many years had gone by, and that's where she sat. You find this all out right after they write the death scene from Ellie's perspective, which is so sad. I'm not even gonna read it because I don't know if I'd make it through it without crying. This is when she then is like, I'm gonna go scatter her bones in the woods. I'm gonna run them over, which again, why couldn't they figure out if she was run over before or after? Whatever. And then at this time, she breaks into the house. So you find out that Noelle is the one who broke into the house with the key, and she decided to take things that would make it seem like Ellie was trying to run off. One of the things she took were these candlesticks that Paul and Laurel got for their wedding from some rich couple. She had noticed them when she was tutoring Ellie and knew they were expensive, and she was like, well, maybe these will seem like she took them so she could pawn them. At that point, the police are like, nah, this girl ran away. So she's leaning into this theory. As she's walking around the house, she's reminiscing, she's taking things that had significance, and she goes, it's odd, you know, because when I look back to those days when I was her tutor, I feel so sure I must have dreamed the whole thing, because by the end, I swear I had no idea what I'd ever seen in her. No idea at all. She was, after all, just a girl.
Number 1, how dare you?
Couldn't have figured that out before you murdered her and used her and ruined her family's life. This woman, they do a really good job. Okay, she does a great job of just demonstrating to some people human life has no value. This woman had one agenda, and even at that, she's saying it's love, but it's obviously not. And I think that's what ended up striking me so much about it is this stuff happens. You read in the news about the careless disregard of human life all of the time, and that's what this woman did. And you're reading it from her perspective, but she doesn't even realize she's doing it. And that's why I think this book is so wildly popular. But she goes on to finish her plan of scattering everything, and she says, oh, well, you know, I think I really just wanted to be caught because I didn't hide her very well, but you drove her way out into the middle of the woods and you buried her. She threw some of her bones away. Again, I think she's lying to herself. I don't think she wanted to be caught because somewhere in her mind, Floyd was gonna come back to her. She hates being a mom, and Poppy hates her. Poppy's overweight, and she's got nits in her hair, and her teeth are a disaster, and Noelle's just miserable. And then she's especially annoyed because Poppy goes to spend time with Floyd, and she's dignified, and she eats different kinds of foods, and she's not addicted to sugar when she's with him, and she's happy, and it's just a mess, you know? She shouldn't have ever been a parent in the first place. This is really where Laurel gets upset about Theo and Hannah, because she's driving by Hannah's house, and she says, Theo was Ellie's. He belonged to her, and she'd belonged to him. They'd inhabited each other completely, like a pair of gloves folded into itself. They were 15. Let's keep this in perspective. And now she is cross with Hannah, cross enough to wonder what Theo even sees in Hannah in comparison to Ellie. She imagines in the warped threads of her irrational thought process that Theo chose Hannah as a consolation prize. But then she remembers seeing that blonde girl coming out of the supermarket on Sunday morning, that smiling golden girl who looked nothing like the sour-faced girl who greets Laurel at her door from time to time, the pinched child who never laughs at her jokes, the tired-looking woman who sighs down the phone at the sound of her mother's voice. And it occurs to her for the very first time that maybe Hannah isn't intrinsically unhappy, that maybe she just doesn't like her. Can you blame her? You're awful to her. and you checked out when Ellie went missing, and the only thing that mattered was that Ellie was missing. You gave up your other kids, and I'm glad you come around, but I don't like you in this part of the story. But as she has this realization, she calls Paul and they have this conversation, and he is so forgiving. Apparently he's a loud breather, but he's a good guy.
Breathe quietly.
And she ends up realizing she sucked as a mom. And she calls Hannah and leaves her a voicemail and just says, I'm proud of you. You're extraordinary. This is where I'm getting. Thanks a lot, Laurel. She just validates her as a person and apologizes for not being a good mom and says, I know about Theo and he's so lucky to have you. She does such a good job of getting you to the point where you're so frustrated, but we all want human redemption. We all want happiness and people to come together. And even though the story is really sad, and like I said, it's not all wrapped up in a bow, because at the end of the day, Ellie's dead. You're watching people redeem themselves and come out of darkness. And that's the part of the book that I like in a book that is just darkness. And so we move forward. Christmas is coming and they've decided to spend Christmas together at Paul and Bonnie's house. Laurel's talked to Blue a couple times. She's feeling really uneasy. And then she's like in that part of life where you're gaslighting yourself. It really gets worse because she goes to their house and she sees the candlesticks that had been stolen. All this stuff is coming together. She sees the candlesticks. She calls Blue. Blue talks more about why she thinks there's something wrong with Floyd. And then 3 days before Christmas, she's over at Floyd's house and they decide to decorate because he never has a Christmas tree, which is super weird, but whatever. And he and Poppy leave and she goes into a study looking for Christmas lights and ends up finding all sorts of clippings in his desk about Ellie, which is super weird, obviously. Somehow this is all connected, right? She's got her mother's intuition going. And as the reader at this point, you're like, well, Noelle said it was a sperm donor. It wasn't Floyd, but you don't really know. Because like I said, Noelle's lying to herself through her whole first person narrative. She's contradicting herself. She's saying things that don't make sense. And so you're kind of like, well, did she steal his sperm? Nobody knows. Is Floyd a good guy? Is he a bad guy? This is where the mystery kind of comes in and you don't really know what to think about him. So then she's finding the clippings and in and out, she's going to see her mother, who's kind of a side character, and she's sick. And throughout the whole book, her mom's saying she's gonna, like, no, you won't see me after today. I'm gonna die. And then she never dies. So the days go on. She's going back and forth. Like I said, this whole book is her going back and forth on being like, this is really weird. So it's Christmas Eve, and they're supposed to all meet to go to Bonnie and Paul's house. Floyd's like, hey, yeah, can you stop by my house before we go? I have a gift for you, but it's just too big. And she's like, I don't trust this man. She has all these weird feelings. So she texts her family, hey, I'm going to Floyd's before Paul's house. If you don't hear from me, this is the address I'm gonna be at. Please send help. I guess good for her, but then they're freaking out and she doesn't reply. And she's sitting outside of his house trying to get the courage to go in. And then we switch to part 5, which is the reveal of the book. For the first time, you're in Floyd's first person perspective, and he's just talking about how amazing Laurel is. And he never thought she'd even give him a second glance, kind of a deal. So it goes from her third person perspective of sitting in the car trying to get up courage to him talking about how great she is, watching her sit in the car. And then we go back to third person perspective, and Laurel goes in the house. She's feeling kind of weird. Poppy's upstairs, and he opens the shaving mirror and he makes all the right noises and all the right gestures, and he comes towards her with his arms outstretched, and she flinches as he hugs her, feels her catch her breath, adrenaline pulsing through her. She is ready to push him from her, ready to escape. She can't imagine that she'd ever found this man's touch pleasing. She can't imagine she'd ever found this man anything other than terrifying. Here, he says, handing her an envelope. Open that first. I'm just popping out to my car to get your other gift. Oh, she says, okay. He stops in the doorway and looks at her. A smile plays on his lips. Goodbye, he says. She hears the front door open and close. The house, now that Floyd has gone, is completely silent. She glances down at the card in front of her and she opens it. It has a picture on the front of a dove in flight. It is strangely unchristmassy. Inside the card is a letter. She begins to read. Laurel, I sense that you are tiring of me. I sense that you have worked out what 100 women before you have worked out, that I am not the man for them. That is fine, because I have worked out that I am not worthy of you and that I must let you go. But before I let you go, I must also unburden myself of an appalling, unthinkable truth. I have something of yours. It was not given to me, rather bequeathed to me in a terrible sequence of events. I'm telling you guys this book. I need you to know that when I first came into possession of this precious thing, it had been horribly abused by another person, and for 5 years I have tended and cared for this possession. I have polished it and nurtured it, and now it is time to return it to you. I am glad we had this time together. Time for you to see me as not a monster, but as a normal man, a man worthy of your affections, if only for a few short weeks. It has been an extraordinary experience for me after so many years in an emotional wasteland. a precious gift. I cannot thank you enough. And I am glad you have had the chance to get to know me, to hopefully view me as a man capable of being trusted with your most precious possession. My study door is unlocked. On my desktop computer, I have left you a video message. Simply press play and I will explain everything. And this is where she goes in, and for chapters, it is going through what happened and you're getting all of the answers. In here, he explains his relationship with Noelle. Towards the end of Noelle's perspective, she's hating being a mother. Poppy's 4 years old when she disappears, but she ends up deciding to leave to get Poppy food, and she leaves her alone, and Poppy climbs up on the counter and falls off and then gets a black eye. And that was kind of Floyd's done point, and he sits her down and was like, we need to talk about me having custody of Poppy. Noelle had seen this coming, and so in her warped mind, she's like, I'm just gonna take Poppy and go to my family's house in Ireland, who I haven't seen in 20 years or whatever, and I'm gonna raise her there, and then she's gonna become refined and amazing, and then Floyd's gonna come to visit some point after he gets over being mad about me just taking her, and then we're gonna fall in love again and be happy. And so her car's all packed, and she shows up to get Poppy and finds out Poppy's not there. And at this point, Floyd's gotten social workers involved, and he is like, no, we're working this out. You're not fit for this. I'm taking Poppy. And this is where Noelle admits to Floyd, how could you ever even think that this child is yours in the first place? Do you know what I had to do to even bring this child into the world? And she admits, this girl named Ellie had the baby, and I hired a sperm donor, and this magnificent creature had nothing to do with either of us, and I can't believe you think you could have made her. Through his video confession, he ends up admitting that he murdered her then. Apparently on accident. He lunged at her and wanted to scare her because he was so upset at what she was saying, and she hit her head and died. But in this confession, he's also just talking about how he didn't really know what to think of it. He didn't really know what to do with it because Noelle obviously lied all the time. A couple months before this, there was the 10th anniversary Crime Watch special of her disappearance. He's sitting on the couch, and it's not a show he normally watches, but the picture of Ellie flashes across the screen, and he is just taken back because she looks just like Poppy. And then he's having these memories of her saying, oh, a girl named Ellie had her. He was explaining, like, I didn't go to the police because, first of all, I didn't know where Ellie was. It kind of seemed unlikely that she ran away, but nobody really knew. And then also he was like, look, I have no way of knowing how this child came to be. She's saying she hired a sperm donor, but if I go to the police now, nobody's going to believe me that I didn't rape or sexually assault or whatever word YouTube will accept a 15-year-old child. He had no proof of that. And he said a month later, they found Ellie's remains. And he said that he went to the funeral and watched Laurel. And she had said in one of the interviews that all she wanted was closure. And he said, shortly after the Crime Watch special, I read an interview with you in The Guardian. It was some kind of a real life interest story in the magazine. You said, and I quote, the nightmare is the not knowing, the lack of closure. I just cannot move forward without knowing where my daughter is. It's like walking through sinking mud. I can see something on the horizon, but I can never ever get to it. It's a living death. And then a month later, I didn't think I was going to cry doing this. This book, I tell you, there were the headlines in the papers, Ellie's remains found. You had your closure. I came to the funeral. I stood at a respectful remove. I saw your legs buckle as your husband helped you into the crematorium and saw them buckle again on the way out. Closure, it seemed, had brought you nothing but a box of bones. But I could give you something that would get you out of the sinking mud and walking towards the horizon. I could give you Poppy. And so this is where he kind of devises the plan to meet Laurel. But initially he was like, no, I wasn't going to start a romantic relationship. My intention was to help you meet your granddaughter in a way that wasn't in a police station or in a social worker's office. Because he said he doesn't really know if he knows what love is, but if he does, the closest thing he's ever felt is with Poppy, which I think is a load of garbage because you have another daughter, sir. He then kind of admits, I should have given her up way sooner, but I loved her too much to let her go. But as time goes on and he's putting the pieces together and he's morphing his appearance to look like Paul so he can strike up a conversation with Laurel, he ends up getting a paternity test and he finds out that he's not the father of Poppy. He's working this whole plan together, and then they meet, and then he realizes that Laurel's putting pieces together because it's kind of obvious. He asks for forgiveness, and then he just says, I've told Poppy the bare bones of what has happened. It's up to you what you want to tell her. Noelle's buried in the garden. It's up to you if you want to turn that into the police. I'm so glad that Poppy's with someone that's going to love her. I'm so glad you get this piece of Ellie back. And then the film stops. Laurel's having this moment of like, oh my gosh, I finally have so many missing pieces of what happened to my daughter, and it's so much more horrifying than her just disappearing and dying, stuck in a basement, forced to have a baby. Gross. It's all so awful. And as she's kind of sitting there having this moment, Poppy comes downstairs and she's like, is my dad ever coming back? And Laurel's like, you know what? I don't know. Then it switches to Floyd, and he is driving off, and he doesn't know what to do, and he's talking to Noelle, actually. This is now him addressing Noelle, and he's just saying, you've ruined my life. And when they find out that Poppy is Ellie's daughter and all these things that happen, my picture is going to be next to yours in the newspaper, and I'm going to be enshrined with you forever in history as some sort of villain. He's not sure if he's going to kill himself or he's going to go into hiding, and he kind of decides, I don't really know if I want to go into hiding forever, so he ends up taking his own life, which you couldn't have just stayed alive and gone to prison so that they could be like, oh, this man that took care of me is at least still alive. He wasn't a terrible person. I mean, I know he murdered somebody, but it was an accident, and also she was a terrible person, and also go to prison and then your kids can go see you. I disagree, and it made me upset because I knew that it was going to be upset for the children. So then we flash forward to 8 months later, and it's Hannah and Theo's wedding. Poppy's there, and Sarah Jade actually has come. Her and Laurel throughout the book are developing a relationship, and they end up getting really close. Even though Poppy and Sarah Jade aren't biologically sisters, they've spent so much time as sisters that they become a family. Laurel has gotten her family back together, and now she's taken in Sarah Jade and obviously Poppy, and they're at the wedding, and everybody's having a great time. And this is where she kind of reveals that her mom finally passed away right after meeting Poppy, and she says, this is why I stayed alive. My soul knew that there was something else out there. For me wanting a funny channel, I am doing a great job right now. So they're in the wedding party, they're on the bus. She's kind of explaining how Poppy reacted when she found out that Floyd died, and she was just saying, he didn't have to die. He was the best dad ever. He could have stayed alive. Thank you for confirming it a couple pages later. I appreciated that devastation. And Laurel just is talking about how she and Hannah are so incredibly close now. She said Hannah lives with Theo now. She rents out the miserable flat in Woodside Park, and Laurel no longer needs to be her cleaning lady. Everything about their previous dynamic has been transformed. They are friends, and Hannah and Poppy are the best thing to come out of the horror of Ellie's disappearance. Poppy hero worships Hannah, and Hannah adores Poppy. They are virtually inseparable. They do a really good job. Even in the end, there's this whole, like, we're at this wedding and Ellie should be here and she's not. We've come back together. We've found whatever happiness looks like when you move forward from something so tragic. And then the book ends and goes to the epilogue, and it's a woman goes to the police station with a book that she got from some thrift store that Noelle frequented a lot. It was discussed a lot in the book, but it's kind of a side note. And inside of this book is a note from Ellie, and it says, I am 17. Noelle Donnelly brought me to her house on May 26, 2005, and has kept me captive in her basement for about a year and a half. I have had a baby. I don't know who the father is, and I'm pretty sure I'm still a virgin. Her name is Poppy. She was born around April 2006. I don't know where she is now or who is looking after her, but please, please find her if you can. Please find her and look after her, and tell her that I loved her. Tell her that I looked after her for as long as I could, and that she was the best little baby in the world. Also, please let my family know that you found this note. My mom is called Laurel Mack and my dad is Paul, and I have a brother called Jake and a sister called Hannah, and I want to tell them that I'm sorry and that I love them more than anything in the world, and that none of them must feel bad about what happened to me because I am brave and I am brilliant and I am strong. Yours sincerely, Ellie Mack. And that's how the story ends. And I'm a mess. Okay, so one other question that I had, most of it was related to the way the investigation went, but then I will note, and I don't know if anyone else felt this way, but at the end of the book, they wrap up the last chapter of Poppy knows Ellie was her mom, but doesn't really know what happened to her. She just kind of knows, oh, she couldn't take care of her, and then Noelle ended up with her. But it doesn't really explain how Laurel felt about any of it, other than she's glad her family's back together. It doesn't describe how she feels about Floyd dying, or why did she call the police to let them know that Noelle was in the yard. And some of it might seem obvious, but I felt like that part was missing. When Poppy says, well, he didn't have to die, I would have appreciated a little bit more context. He gave her an open-ended option, and I would have liked a little bit more why she chose what she chose, even if it seems obvious. So anyway, this is the horrifying book of Then She Was Gone. Tell me what you guys think, thought, feel. I still can't get through the book without crying my eyes out. And like I said, I just feel I can relate to it because I'm a mother of two children, and two children that I kind of like see in these characters too. Not exactly the same. She did such a good job of making me really feel it and feel it as if it were me, which is why I think she lied about saying it's comforting or whatever, neatly wrapped up. It's garbage. She put me right there with all of it, and I don't appreciate it. But what were your thoughts? Do you feel like the plot holes were just missed? Do you feel like she was alluding to fumbled police and social work? Do you feel like Laurel ever really cared about Floyd? I don't know. It was only a month. That's not some great grand romance, but she just seemed like she didn't care when he died. Did you feel like the end was missing? Because in the beginning, I'm like, no, it's going to end and she'll come back and then they'll all be happy. And instead, we were left with a story that happens. There are people with careless disregard for human life. There is death. There's murder. There's all these things that happen in this book. It was not some great escape of a read, but it also was incredibly thought-provoking and written very well. So tell me your thoughts. And stay tuned. Hopefully I do this again if I figure out how to edit. Thanks for spending time with me. Bye.